All right. What's happening out there, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to the Crash Bang Boom podcast, episode 287. I'm excited about today's guest and that I haven't had a drum builder / manufacturer on the podcast in some time. But today we have Dan Ford Drums. In addition to designing and building, Dan also does drum restoration and builds guitar for that matter. So we had no shortage of goodness to talk about. And certainly one of my favorite topics was hearing some of the backstories on the reclaimed wood he uses for said drums. Super cool convo, so I hope y'all dig it. One note as well about the episode, Dan sounds a little distorted at the very top, but it levels out around his first longer answer and is good from there. Today's episode is sponsored by oneuploops.com. Drummer Carson Gain and his team spend an incredible amount of time recording over 450,000 shaker, tambourine, and hi-hat loops at every possible tempo in multiple fields with incredible mics and outboard gear for you to pick and choose. It's organized for you to find exactly what you need with just a few clicks and everything feels and sounds incredible. You can sign up for free to check it out and gain full access to all 450,000 loops starting at just $6 a month. No download limits, whatever you want, whenever you want. New loops, one-shots, and drum breaks are being added weekly. Definitely a great addition to the arsenal of any drummer and or producer, and I can vouch for it myself, having used it. Check it out at oneuploops.com. Crash Bang Boom Podcast can be found where all podcasts are found, including Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and more. If you like what you hear, please check out any of the previous 280-plus episodes, and you can give me a like and or a subscription or even a positive review, as I would appreciate it. All right, here we go. Dan Ford Drums. Drumming, restoration, guitar building, and more. All that. Crash, bang, boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
Yes! All right, I'm here with Dan Ford. Dan Ford Drums, restoration, woodworking, all kinds of good stuff. You build guitars, apparently, so we get to talk about all kinds of invention, manufacturing, and everything that goes into making all these instruments that you're making, which, by the way, look amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Well, I guess let's start with this drum process. It's a funny thing because sometimes, the algorithm on Instagram gets it right. Mine always seems to be like fat dogs, drums, chicks with like big boobs and like tattoos. Mm-hmm. Basically the shit that I'm always looking at. It knows. But interestingly enough, I believe the way that I found you was via just a search, and I saw this beautiful snare drum that I wasn't familiar with, and I didn't recognize the badge, or even the design looked super unique. So I was just like, what is this? And so you've been on my radar ever since I originally saw one of your drums and just thought, whoever's making this shit is beautiful. So
that's awesome. I'm glad that I can actually cut through on some kind of algorithmic level.
Yeah.
It's nice when that happens.
I hear you, man. Well, I'm assuming I've seen like you've got woodworking stuff. So I guess tell me a little bit about the history of where this all started, leading up to you starting to make some of these drums. And we can also talk about the guitars and everything else. But where did it start?
I started working at my uncle's cabinet shop back in like 2001. Mm-hmm. And I just started learning woodworking at that point. And then I just kept doing it as a job, so I worked in cabinet shops. I worked in like finished carpentry, worked in, different kinds of wood shops over the course of like 20 years.
Yeah.
I thought about drum making for like 10 years. I had it hyped up to be this big thing that I wouldn't ever be able to do.
Yeah.
And so finally, after like thinking about it for like 10 years, I finally just said, you know what, like I just need to start. I just need to try it.
Yep.
And, I just did like a good amount of research, and I was like, oh, hell, I can do this. I didn't even really know about stave drums, which is the kind of drums that I make right now.
Yeah. Because for the people listening, if you're thinking about a wood drum, generally speaking, especially the way they're mass marketed, you're generally steam bending plies to then make what is ultimately the shell. So you have these separate plies, and then it all. But yeah, when I saw yours, I didn't even know what to call that. I wasn't even familiar with that design. So yeah, how did you find even out about that process?
I watched a ton of YouTube videos.
Yeah.
But having my background in woodworking made it much easier for me to sort of like put it all together from random videos that I was watching of people making drums like this.
Sure.
So it was super intuitive for me to make drums like this rather than doing like the forms for steam bending, the plies, or that just seemed, and it still seems a little unattainable to me, but
Right.
I'll figure out ply shells at some point.
Hmm.
Anyway, this was just a really easy way for me to get into it,
Right.
and for me to just get started.
Hmm.
And I still feel like I'm still kind of starting. It's been like 3 years now.
Yeah.
It's still a learning process every drum that I make.
Yeah, man. So I mean, you start getting the idea of how to make the drums, then come time to not only make the shell, there's all the additional, hardware, be it rims from tension rods to lugs to,
Yeah.
throw to butt plate to everything else involved in it.
Yeah.
But what were some of the first few that you did? And did you do those with reclaimed redwood, similar to some of the ones that I've seen, or?
No, I actually just recently started doing redwood. The beginning I was doing when I was working in a cabinet shop, and I just had like, there was just a ton of like scrap wood around.
Yeah.
So it was kind of just making drums out of whatever scraps were around the shop.
Yeah.
So the first one I made actually out of beech, just because we had a ton of beech laying around.
Right.
That drum, I was very excited about it. It didn't go very well, but it wasn't like a horrible train wreck.
Right.
I learned that, you got to make the shell the right size. It's like it's kind of a specific size that you have to make the shell.
100%. Yeah.
So I made it like a little bit too big, and I was all excited. It's all this time to make it and drill the holes and cut this like the snare beds, and
Yes.
it's all this work until you finally get to play it.
Right.
And then, I started playing it, and it just like over the course of like a half hour, it just started detuning.
Oh.
And it just started sounding just like mud. I think I had just made the shell just a little too big.
Uh-huh.
And so the head was actually, as I played it, the head was sort of like creeping away from the shell, if you can imagine that.
Uh-huh.
So I figured that my first one wasn't going to be like a home run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But like I said, it was close. It wasn't even like it fell apart or anything. It was just like I needed to adjust something a little bit.
Right.
I think the next one I made was out of ash, and I just made it too thin.
Yeah.
Like the shell was too thin, and it just sounded like, it wasn't holding a note.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't any life to it. There wasn't any tone to it.
Yeah.
These stave drums they just are different than ply drums.
Totally.
The ply drums, they've got all these layers of glue that hold them, rigid.
Mm-hmm.
The rigidity sort of imparts a lot of the reflective tones of a snare drum.
Yeah.
But these stave drums, the thickness of the shell varies depending on what kind of wood you're using.
Mm-hmm.
The density of the wood sort of changes the way you have to build the drum.
Mm-hmm.
And these were all things that I hadn't really thought about. So I was just going through experiment after experiment, just to get an idea. And it took probably like 3 or 4 snares before I really produced one that I felt good about.
Mm-hmm.
That one I made out of walnut.
Okay.
And it was for a friend of mine named Paul Hale. Hi, Paul. And it actually turned out to be lovely.
Nice.
It was a lovely piece of art, I thought.
A win.
And, yeah, it was a win. But yeah, again, I was still doing all these drums out of just like scrap wood that I had laying around the shop.
Mm-hmm.
And I still try to do things with as much as like I can with like reclaimed sources. Wood shops generally have like small chunks of wood just kind of like left over from jobs. And that's kind of all I need is like small chunks of wood.
Right.
I guess if I'm making like a 14-inch deep kick drum, then I probably have to go out and source some actual materials.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm making like a whole drum set, then I want to, as much as I can, make a whole drum set out of like, as much as I can out of like the same wood.
Uh-huh.
Preferably the whole same piece of wood. That's great.
Sure. It's important also to sort of clarify when you say the stave process. I mean, if the listeners are imagining this, it's like if you have, 20 sort of vertical 6-inch long, long sort of rectangles, you would have to cut the backside sort of at an angle so you can ultimately line them up next to each other and make a circle. And then I'm imagining from there you glue it, and then is that how it works?
Yeah, it's so for like a snare drum, I generally use 30 staves.
Wow.
So it's 30 vertical pieces of wood, and the edges of each one of those pieces is cut at a bevel,
Right.
so that the whole thing goes together
Yep.
to form a circle. And yeah, then I just glue those pieces together. I use a round clamp to hold it all together, and it needs to dry for a little bit. And then you can imagine you've got this 30-sided geometrical shape. You have to cut all those points off in order for it to actually be round.
Right.
So that's just, making a jig that spins over a router. So I have a router table and just a jig, and I just, can spin the drum over the router to cut all those corners off, and then cut it down to close to its finished dimension at that point.
Yep.
And then same thing for the inside. You've got all those inside corners, and I have to get a router in there and spin the drum while I'm like moving the router inside of it to cut all those little corners off, and then get the shell to close to what its finished thickness is going to be.
Wow, man. And then I think if you found some like reclaimed redwood, what's the story about where you found that and sort of making that drum?
The first redwood snare that I made was actually from a cool piece of redwood that I got from a friend of mine who owns a salvage yard in Petaluma, California, called Heritage Salvage.
Mm-hmm.
He was very enthusiastic about my drum making when I started doing it. So the piece of wood was from the bleachers in Golden Gate Park. It was, I think, where the first like love-in hippie movement sort of started.
Whoa.
So this was like where, a lot of hippie asses had sat on this piece of wood.
Yeah.
I made my first redwood drum out of that. And again, unfortunately, I made it too thin. I didn't know, because I hadn't worked with redwood before.
Ah.
And it just sort of like, because it's a very soft wood, it actually needs to be thicker than you would imagine
Gotcha.
in order to impart any life to the drum. So I made it just sort of like as thin as I was making sort of harder wood drums, and the tone just turned into mush.
Mm-hmm.
It just like I would tap on the shell, and it was just nothing. Like
Yeah.
it was, and I went to the trouble. I went ahead and put all the hardware on and everything just to see.
Oh, damn it.
I just wanted to see. And it was just kind of lifeless. So I really wish that I hadn't learned that lesson with such a cool piece of wood.
Totally.
But I did, and it was a hard lesson to learn. But
Yeah.
but here we are. I think the next redwood snare I made was for a drummer named Michael DeMarco. He lives out in Maryland, and he requested a redwood snare drum. And so
Wow.
I was able to source another really nice piece of old growth. All the redwood I use is reclaimed old growth.
Sure.
So I was able to source some more old growth, and actually made a really nice snare drum this time out of redwood.
There you go. How much thicker do you feel like you had to go beyond maybe some of the more hardwoods, like you were saying previously, to get it to where it was a good tonal place?
I have to go at least an eighth of an inch thicker.
Wow.
So like middle of the road thickness for most of these shells is about a half inch thick.
Okay.
And you would subtract from that or add to it depending on what the density of the wood is.
Mm-hmm.
So I generally would have to make a redwood shell for a snare drum, like about 5/8 thick is a really good number.
Gotcha.
And that's actually, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in this realm of instrument making, an eighth of an inch is a lot of material it's a lot of mass to add back onto a drum.
Right. As far as the what was the idea behind the badge? Because you have a really nice Real pretty badge, and looks great with the gold hardware on the sort of red stain drum. The combination of the gold and red and all that looks awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, another friend of mine who was also very enthusiastic about my drum making when I started, who is a designer, just said that he was sitting at his breakfast table one morning and he just came up with this DF logo, sent it to me, and I was like, "This is great. Yeah, I would love to use this." And so, yeah, like he really just kind of like just threw that together really quick. And I have another friend out in Sebastopol, California, which isn't very far from here. It's maybe about 7 miles from here, and she's a wonderful artist, craftsperson, jewelry maker, just kind of overall artist. And I asked her what she thought, and she thought that like acid etching this logo into some brass discs would be kind of a good way to go. And so that's like a process where like the logo is like the surface of the brass, and then the rest of the brass around the logo is sort of melted away.
Whoa.
Which makes a really cool badge. Every one is a little bit different, which I really enjoy, because all my drums are pretty different from each other. I sort of just I don't have like a set line of drums that I make. I do mostly just like custom stuff. So each one can be a little bit different.
Totally. When it came time to do the rims, lugs, and all of that, what did you settle on for that stuff?
I still do pretty much every drum differently, different hardware.
Yeah.
I talk a lot with the clients about what sound they're looking for, and what, in combination with the woods that I'm using, what's gonna come together, what hardware, what wood, what heads, what are all the ingredients that are come together to generate the sound that a client is looking for.
Yeah.
But I do die cast, I do single flange, I do double flange, I do, just kind of whatever the drum is needing. But I found a company online. I found a company pretty quickly. There aren't a whole lot of drum hardware companies.
Oh, I know.
And Drum Factory Direct, if you know.
I just built a snare drum. I was going to ask you if that's where you went. I just totally built a snare drum out with their components.
I get absolutely the majority of my stuff from Drum Factory Direct.
Nice.
Their customer service is awesome. They still seem like just kind of a small operation.
Right.
Which is crazy considering the amount of stuff that they have.
Of course. Big time. So in building, like you said, sort of one drum, it's another thing to then try to tie a whole kit together. The kit that I saw looked like 2 toms bass drum and a snare drum. Was that one of the full kits? Tell me about the process of doing that.
The most recent one that I did was the old growth redwood kit.
Mm-hmm.
That whole kit, so snare drum, rack tom, floor tom, kick drum, the whole kit was actually sourced and built from the same piece of wood.
Wow.
From one piece of redwood. It was a 22-foot long, 3-inch thick, 10 inches wide piece of redwood.
Wow.
It was from a massive wine tank. The wine tank was 18 feet tall by 24 feet in diameter. The bottom planks were, the longest one is 24 feet long.
Yeah.
I got probably the next one over from the center, which was 22 feet long.
Wow.
It's just like the holy grail, being able to find a piece of wood that's big enough to make an entire drum set out of.
I can't believe it.
Yeah. And it also, so there was red wine that was in this tank for like 80 years.
Whoa.
And so the red wine sort of crystallized in the pores of the wood grain and kind of imparted like more of a more of a density than you would find in a lot of redwood.
Ah,
So it provides, more reflective properties than you would find in redwood because it's just got this density to it from the crystallized tannins of the red wine.
wild.
It also smelled like a dream the whole time I was milling it.
That is awesome. Holy moly.
And then you can see on the kit, if you're looking for it, you can still see some like purple stripes here and there just from the staining from the wine.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, it was a really cool find. This was again from the salvage yard that I have good relationship with in Petaluma, California, called Heritage Salvage. They dismantled 2 of these wine tanks from Lodi, California, and I was lucky enough to be there and to learn about that when I needed that piece of wood.
Damn. Wow. Talk about the stars aligning, man. Holy moly.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
Yeah, and and then to see the kit, really beautiful, and I love the story behind it. I mean, one question: if the wine had sort of crystallized in it, as you had said, did it then alter the thickness of it in recognizing that, or were you kind of able to go with the original sort of thickness for redwood, and it just had a slightly different quality, you know?
I think the toms I actually ended up going about a 16th thinner than I normally would.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about sort of the density of it. As I was thinning the shells, I was sort of tap on them as I get down to kind of close to where I feel like they're going to want to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to like a 1/2 inch thick, which is kind of where I would normally want a redwood tom to be. And I just felt like it needed to go a little bit further. I felt like it could go a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think that the density definitely helped. So it helped me get to a lower tuning range with these drums,
Uh-huh.
with a more low end presence with these toms, while still having projection and volume.
Right.
So most of the time with redwood, I would have to have a little bit more mass in order to provide that projection.
Interesting. It makes sense. It's just such a wild sort of feel it out process.
It is a feel it out process.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting better about knowing when to stop, or like when to be careful.
Yeah.
If I'm moving into a situation that I've never been in before, then I know to begin with I need to plan a little bit more ahead of time to know that I'm going to have to like feel things out.
Yeah, man.
I got to give myself a little bit more room to play with.
Yeah, I can see that. Damn, man. At which point did because you build guitars as well?
I do. I've been working for Grez Guitars in Petaluma, California for a little over 2 years now.
Okay.
Barry from Grez took me on. He needed somebody to work in the shop, and I had some woodworking experience, and he had seen that I was building drums, and I didn't know the first thing about guitars at all. He's been not only employing me, but teaching me the ways of the guitar.
Those are some beautiful guitars, really unique.
Yeah,
like everything from the colors to the body design. They're really cool looking guitars.
They are, and he's a great designer, and he's a terrific engineer, and he's been doing it also for I think maybe close to 15 years now. He's been making guitars. He's been through all the stuff that I'm going through right now, which is like the whole like feel it out, just make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, move on. He's been through all this, which is great. He's kind of a great mentor for me in that way.
Sure. Yeah.
I feel very fortunate. I get to learn how to make guitars too. I had no intention of doing that.
Yeah.
I never even thought about it because, again, like that, if drum making seemed lofty and out of reach for me, guitar making, certainly, which is much, much more involved, seemed just exponentially out of reach.
Yeah.
But I know how to make Grez guitars now. I don't know, if I if I could go and just like make any guitar, but at least I've been
For
trained
sure.
on how to make Grez guitars. And
Right.
so yeah, I do all the woodworking there. I still don't do any of like the electronics setups, or like
I hear
I
you.
don't put strings on. I don't
Yeah.
know anything about pickups,
Right.
but I do the woodworking.
Gotcha. Are those guitars like semi-hollow bodies?
There are the Mendocinos that are semi-hollows, and there's another line, Folsom, that are solid, and they're redwood. The solid bodies
Wow.
are redwood with mahogany necks most of the time. The semi-hollows are mahogany bodies with redwood tops. So
Wow.
I just finished some redwood toms and a snare drum. I just finished the snare drum this morning, and all the
Wow.
redwood was actually like leftover pieces from Grez Guitars.
Oh, damn. So now you get some of those leftovers as well.
Yeah,
That's pretty.
yeah.
That's pretty sweet. By the way, on those Folsom guitars, I dig the old tremolo that I've seen
Oh
on some of
yeah,
those. Or I don't
yeah.
know if that's what's on all of them, but like they're just really good looking guitars, man.
They're very attractive, and they play well and they sound great.
Awesome, man. Hell yeah. What about drum restoration, man? When did that become a thing?
That became a thing maybe about a year after I started making drums.
Okay.
I just, I made a snare drum for a friend of mine named Cody Rhodes down in Oakland, and he was just asking me about, what, like, if I could do drum restoration, and I said I don't know, and I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, if I do all the processes, flattening edges, cutting bearing edges, sourcing new hardware, things like, I'm like, that's all it would take. It was a little bit intimidating because what he was wanting me to work on were vintage drums,
Ah,
and that's what a lot of people want worked on, is vintage drums. Those are the ones that need it usually the most. If somebody's interested in making their vintage drums sort of more playable,
right.
then that's what's needed. So he brought me like an old made in Japan sort of knockoff, like a Ludwig knockoff,
Hmm.
for me to get started on. So it wasn't quite so intimidating. And then there were some other guys. There has been like kind of a steady stream of people ever since then who sort of just need some drums worked on here and there. I was just at
Right.
a recording studio last night, and the guy has like a huge session coming up with some very big names coming in at the end of next month, and he needs his drums just reworked.
Yeah.
He just does, and he just needs me to like take care of making sure that the drums are as good as they can be for this session that he has coming up.
Well, first of all, that drum collection sounds really interesting at that studio, and I like that you're going to have all this kind of classic gear that you're going to be able to modernize to a particular extent and making it maybe just a little more functional with certain aspects than
So like,
what it used to be. And I mean, I have a couple of 70s snares, like Superphonics,
mhm.
and the first thing that I replace, honestly, is the throw and the butt plate. I just get the new Ludwig ones that are notched,
Yeah,
so I can know what the tension is. It doesn't slip. The arm doesn't slip off. Like the butt plate holds.
yeah.
I hate having to thread the string through the fucking that whole
And then tie like the
and then
surgical
tie it
knot.
like and on some of those thrusts you had to put it through the tiniest hole that was barely bigger than the string that you had to put through it. It would drive me absolutely insane, so I always swap that stuff out.
Good.
But I because I have all, at least in the form of snare drums, they're all metal drums.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, it's kind of a restoration. I had a buddy of mine's dad worked at Ludwig, and they had some Black Beauty shells that were never that weren't painted, So it's just raw brass.
Oh, wow.
Kind of all patinaed and looks all crazy. And it was just the shell. So that's actually the snare that I built that I was kind of mentioning earlier with all the parts from Drum Factory Direct.
Cool.
And it was cool. I mean, I've swapped out so many parts. I know how to build drums and everything. So I was like, I knew exactly what I needed. I just needed to make sure that I got all of the dimensions right and the spacing between, the lugs. And of course, the first tension rods that I got weren't long enough. So then I had to get 2.5 inch. And I was like, all right, that's not so bad, And I got it, and it's loud. It's kind of just a big, loud, raw looking thing.
Yeah.
But going back to the drum restoration and sort of that collection and what you've done previously, I feel like sort of what I mentioned between the throw off and maybe the butt plate, but a lot of times, especially with wooden drums, it seems getting the bearing edges sort of redone that get a little wonky and fuck tuning up. Is that a lot of what you see and end up doing?
That is most of what I see.
Yeah.
Most of the drums that I end up working on are from like 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yep.
And they've all just been played a lot. And over the course of 60, 70 years, that playing, it creates indentations in the edges.
Yep.
And it also, it bends hoops.
Yep.
Just playing on drums for that long, it bends hoops. A lot of times you have a ton of trouble tuning older drums like that.
Yes.
And that's why. So those edges, if you want to get your full tuning range back, those edges need to be flattened. And I make it my mission to try to recut those bearing edges to as close to what they were originally as possible, because to me that's like the vibe of the drum.
Yep.
A lot of the older Ludwigs have like a super rounded over. It's not just like a sharp quarter inch round into like a sharp like 45. It's like they do that, but then they sand the piss out of it. Just like, and these drums are like so old and vibey and thumpy. And I really want to maintain that as much as I can. That's only like one of the kind of bearing edges out there on vintage drums. So
yeah.
Anyway, I think if you're going to have anybody recut the bearing edges, I think it's really important to try to, get them to replicate the shapes as much as possible.
I hear you, man.
Unless you're just going for like a totally different sound, which I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't put like a modern bearing edge on like a beautiful like vintage kit.
Right.
It'd be weird.
Totally. Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about everything from guitar building to drum building and drum restoration. It's funny. I feel like you fell into these things. You're like the dude in The Big Lebowski, just like, I'll give that a try. And you're like, oh shit, that worked out great. All right, I'm way into this.
That was a conscious decision before, when I started making drums. It's just like, I have to at some point allow myself to get into this, which means I'm going to make mistakes. I can't be such a perfectionist that it keeps me from doing anything.
Yeah.
I have to move forward with my life. I'm 43 now, and I just like want to do stuff that makes me happy. I want to do cool shit with my life, and that just means I just got to like try things.
Yeah.
Get adventurous and make some mistakes, and that's the way I decided I needed to do things.
Yeah, man.
As soon as I open myself up to trying something, then like it usually opens up doors to other things. Or somebody asks me to do this other thing, and I'm like, sure, why not?
Yeah.
I had a guy ask me last year. I had a guy ask me just to like if I could strip all the finish off of his old like Fender bass body and then like respray the whole thing black lacquered, like shiny black lacquer. And I was like, yeah, sure, I can probably do that.
Wow.
And I learned a lot, and I did it, and it looked great. And so yeah, it is funny how like people just come up with things for me to do, and it's always an opportunity for me to just learn something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers to new adventures, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Before we go, man, what's your story with drumming? How long have you been playing drums? Did the drums precede the woodworking and all of that?
Oh yeah, like the drums. I started in school band. I started playing, concert percussion in school band in fourth grade when I was 8,
Oh, wow.
and then I did it. I did it all through high school in the school program, marching band, all that. Started playing in like punk bands when I was like 13. I'm playing, and I still play to this day. It's been a long time, and it's the same kind of thing where like, once in a while, I get to do cool stuff with that. um, I'm not like pushing super hard. I've never like pushed super hard to like make it my career or anything like that.
Yeah.
I probably could have, but I also got like other stuff that I'm interested in doing, obviously.
Yeah, clearly.
But yeah, I'm gonna be playing like I'm gonna be playing at the Fox Theater in Oakland, which is a huge place. I get to play there in a couple weeks.
What band are you playing with?
I'm playing with this guy named Kelly Finnegan, and he's a soul singer songwriter. He's also the singer for a band called Monophonics.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this is like his solo project, but we're opening for a band called Black Pumas
Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah.
at the Fox Theater. And actually, like the redwood kit that I'm working on right now, that's going to be its first show.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Hell yeah, man. That is all
Yeah.
exciting. Super cool. Well,
Yeah.
what a super cool story, man, here and how you've kind of stumbled in and or found some of these things just by willing to give it a try and accepting, there's going to be ups and downs. But again,
Right.
I love the drums. I think they're beautiful, and best of luck
Thanks, man.
continuing to make them and continuing to play and enjoying new and adventurous endeavors, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for showing interest in talking.
Yeah, man. Best of luck in this new year, dude. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to Dan for all the super cool stories. Looking forward to seeing some video of the maiden voyage of that redwood kit. They look good and they sure as hell sound good. We'll catch y'all next week. Crash, bang, boom.